Oh, sorry, did that hurt? Oh, if it didn't, here's another. I want to ask you a question. Where on my shirt does it say the word janitor? Right here, on the name tag, right after not A. I started living down here for 2 reasons: to keep my games safe from delistings and rent. But how could I have guessed that you'd delist so many, you'd start flushing them down the toilet? My drinking water has been contaminated with Battleborn. I trip over an Avengers PS4 case every 20 feet. And, you know, it was nice to take the weekend to build a new armoire out of Radical Heights. The one I made out of Fast and Furious Crossroads wasn't broken or anything. Buying things, right? We do it pretty frequently. It's how you get copies of Balan Wonderworld, and for that, I'm forever thankful. But owning things is such a hassle. Like, I gotta find a room for this, I gotta water it daily, putting it through college is gonna bankrupt me. If only somebody would take it away from me. Delistings are getting worse and worse every day, isn't that good news? The move to fully digital games with no physical components like a disc means that you own a very small amount of the actual game that you buy. Transformers Devastation is gone, sure, but with the 4 deadliest letters in game collection today, we get to do sick nasty dinosaur suplex combos all the livelong day. But a game like Evolve? Or the Poker Night at the Inventory games? Those either exist only as digital games, or rely on operational online servers that just don't exist anymore. The further we go in the direction of games that rely so heavily on the internet for either storage or basic functions, the closer we get to a tipping point where games might be impossible to preserve in their full state. We've seen that plenty recently thanks to a particular type of game. And not so much a genre, but a philosophy that has worn out its welcome quicker than any other. Games as a service. Games as a service are a fairly new idea, created in the depths of hell by Satan to trick people into getting multiple jobs that don't pay them. They are leeches on both your time and mental health, constantly poking and pestering you to come back online for your daily rewards, like a parasite that knows your credit card number. If I see a game tell me it has a battle pass, I treat that like flashing a loaded gun. This game model would go on to be refined and improved into the modern formula that we have today. Start out with a usually free game, stuff it fit to burst with trinkets and funny-looking guns that people will want to spend money on, supply players with a steady stream of content to keep them coming back, and you have a money-making factory. Games like Destiny 2, Fortnite, Grand Theft Auto Online, and Genshin Impact never stop making money, despite some being almost a decade old. Grand Theft Auto Online makes upwards of $800 million a year off of shark cards, and any game company who heard that would want a piece of the pie. Problem is that these games are super difficult to make, and even harder to upkeep, because what if you go through all this trouble and then make Lawbreakers? These games don't just make a lot of money, they burn it too. And if they can't make back what it costs to keep them up, they're completely screwed. It doesn't matter how big the franchise, doesn't matter how big the publisher, it doesn't even matter if they've done it right in the past, they can still find a way to screw it up. EA owns Apex Legends, which, if my college roommate was to be believed, was more addictive than crack cocaine. They tried making a fun, cartoony, team-based battle royale called Knockout City, with one of the worst trailers of all time. I am so much more excited for the game they're not making. It was released in May of 2021 and was found dead in June of 2023. Epic Games! Those guys who let Naruto learn about 1960s segregation make a lot of money. Like, too much money. Do you really need Bandcamp, guys? You haven't even taken harmonics out of the packaging yet. They not only made Fortnite, but another battle royale that was made to muscle in on that lucrative Knockout City turf with Rumbleverse, made by Iron Galaxy. This was set to be the first battle royale game to be cool, since it had wrestling moves in it, but only 6 months after it released, it died. So why do these games fail so quickly? Well, if they failed to catch an audience early on, then there's no way to offset the costs of running the servers. Give it the old 6-month shuffle, watch it bleed out, then have its big brother soak up the losses. It's fine. When it's not fine is when you don't make the same amount of money in a year as Madagascar. And that's exactly what we're focusing on. Things less successful than an entire country. Shame on you and your entire family. We're better to start than a game that tried to get in on the ground floor of games as a service, and whose name is now a synonym for failure. Battleborn. Created by Gearbox in 2016, Battleborn started life as a new installment in Gearbox's Brothers in Arms series. This was a series of tactical shooters that managed to scratch a very particular itch for squad-based tactical shooters that got Gearbox on the map. But this turning into Battleborn seems impossible. The connective tissue between Brothers in Arms and Battleborn can actually be found in the cancelled Brothers in Arms Furious 4, which started development back in 2011. Revealed by Gearbox at E3, Brothers in Arms Furious 4 wasn't exactly what people were hoping for. What should have been a follow-up to Hell's Highway was instead a new team-based shooter starring 4 soldiers racing across Eastern Europe to go kill Hitler. Now, I'm all for killing Hitler, but a change in studio philosophy between Hell's Highway and Furious 4 meant that a series like Brothers in Arms was pretty much dead in the water. See, in 2009, Gearbox had released the first Borderlands game, and while Brothers in Arms kept the studio humming along, Borderlands hit the gas and sent the studio into the big time. So if that sort of aesthetic and humor worked for Borderlands, why wouldn't it work for Brothers in Arms? Or better yet, why would it work for Brothers in Arms? The trailer and gameplay that followed would be blasted by fans of the series for being an obvious and far too radical departure that is only recognizable as a Brothers in Arms game thanks to a few handy hints left in the title. And after the backlash, they even took that away! In a 2013 Gearbox press conference, CEO and perverted magician Randy Pitchford talked about how Furious 4 was losing the spirit of the original series and needed major retooling. It was winning on its own merits, but it was not Brothers in Arms. I said, look, unhinge it from Brothers in Arms. Continue to drive and iterate even further. Focus on what is making that work and what ideals are leading you there. So Furious 4 would inch closer and closer to a full-on release in 2014, where it stopped picking up the phone, and a little later on would re-emerge as a whole new property, Battleborn. So what type of game is Battleborn? So Battleborn was revealed by Game Informer magazine and would later on get a trailer showing off some of its features, like a diverse cast of characters, massive waves of enemies, and a huge variety of weapons and playstyles. Okay, but what type of game? Randy himself talked up how this was the most ambitious title Gearbox had ever made, fusing different genres together to make an immersive universe with eye-popping style and brain-melting gameplay. Fascinating. What genres are we fusing exactly? Oh, well, why didn't you just ask? Well, obviously, Battleborn is FPS. Hobby-grade co-op campaign. Genre-blended, multi-mode competitive esports. Meta growth. Choice. Plus, epic Battleborn heroes. Does that answer your question? I do not care if it answered your question. There is so much to drag out of this car accident of a tweet, but I want to start with how the definition of Battleborn has to use Battleborn as a descriptor. So the words we can salvage from this include FPS, co-op campaign, esports, and Battleborn, but I don't really get that one. So it's gonna be a hero-based shooter, every character having a varied power set for different situations, which may have been news to Gearbox because that sounds an awful lot like a game that isn't Battleborn. In truth, Battleborn was a first-person multiplayer online battle arena with influences from hero shooters, but was still a MOBA at heart. That was a fact about the game that Randy Pitchford desperately tried to hide. On Twitter, Randy would say that Battleborn wasn't really a MOBA, and instead it was an FPS, burying the MOBA lead as best he could, and I don't blame him. I've seen people I love turn into people I hate when they play MOBAs. They're the most toxic type of games that have ever been made, and never before has Trevenant sent people into such a blind fury. Regardless of his noble intentions, though, this just served to confuse people as to what sort of game Battleborn even was. It had the co-op campaign mode from a game like Borderlands, different PvP modes with the lanes, minions, and heroes with upgradable skill trees from a game like League of Legends, and a CEO who would have told you it was a racing game if it got you to buy a copy. Nobody really knew what Battleborn was. I doubt even the developers had a solid grasp on what the game was after all this time, and that grasp would loosen just a few weeks after the announcement. Blizzard's first new game in over a decade, Overwatch was set to be the biggest multiplayer game of 2016, which put Battleborn into the worst spot it could have been. Direct comparison. Comparing these two, though, is like comparing apples to oranges, even if the apple is desperately trying to paint itself orange. There are fundamental differences that make comparing these games kinda ridiculous. They're both first-person, yeah, and have a cast of radically different characters, but Overwatch was clearly going for something like Team Fortress 2, while Battleborn was going for the MOBA crowd. Could you reasonably compare these two games and say that they're competition for each other? Of course not, they were catering to completely different markets. Problem there is that the MOBA market didn't really know it was being catered to because nobody understood what Battleborn was. Battleborn was still having identity issues, and even with it being announced first, people still saw Battleborn as a copy of Overwatch. Remember how I said that Randy Pitchford was working really hard to make sure people didn't think this game was a MOBA? Well, it worked, and the general public didn't think the game was gonna be a MOBA anymore. Instead, they thought it was a hero shooter like Overwatch. By forcing themselves out of their own niche to butt heads with Overwatch, Battleborn earned its reputation as a Bush League knockoff. That reputation wasn't helped by actively calling out Overwatch and further tying these two games together in people's minds. You know it's a great rivalry when one side is constantly on the attack and the other side doesn't realize they're in a rivalry. Oh, of course this one post wasn't the only thing that made people think Battleborn was great value Overwatch. But face it, you still remember this. This public image of Battleborn versus Overwatch was completely reversed internally at Gearbox, where they were terrified at the prospect of taking on Blizzard. In an interview with Glixel.com, Randy Pitchford described the feeling at Gearbox when Overwatch was announced and if they were scared. Absolutely, because you notice really quickly that, holy crap, the launch dates are gonna step on top of each other. I remember when Blizzard announced Overwatch, we were already committed. We were announced, we had our date, we were running for it. You know, Activision's going to outspend us every day of the week. They're just gonna brute force it. We can't overcome that. There's nothing we can do to beat the brute force part of the fight. So we took the attitude of, look, it's not a fight, man. Let's just focus on our goals and make the game that's fun and the game we want to make, and trust it'll work. How Randy discusses the lead up to the game's release in these quotes and how it was actually handled, though, are completely at odds. Internally not wanting to pick a fight they couldn't win, but externally trying to bring as much attention to the comparison as possible. There was no need to be so cryptic and vague with what Battleborn was. If it was made clear from the outset that this was a first-person MOBA, it could have avoided a lot of trouble. But with the constant attention it drew to its competition, by making it a competition in the first place, the game had nowhere to go but down. And down it went! After a successful beta brought in over 2 million players, the game would have a successful launch on May 6th, 2016. Only for Overwatch to have a much more successful launch a day earlier. May 5th, 2016 was the launch of Overwatch's open beta, with players given the option to either play Gearbox's new game for $60 or play Blizzard's new game for free. And when Overwatch would finally get its full-scale release, it would be priced at $20 cheaper. Then you compare the fact that Battleborn's contemporaries like Dota and League of Legends were free, and you can see that Gearbox had done everything wrong. Just a taste of Overwatch was enough to completely overshadow Battleborn. Those problems with understanding the game also extended to when people got their hands on it, earning the game generally mixed reviews and sitting at a 69 on Metacritic. Somewhere, Randy Pitchford is bouncing up and down in his chair and giggling at that fact. People looked at the two as hero-based shooters, and in that case, of course Overwatch will win because that's what it was! Battleborn began showing its wounds as early on as May 25th. Only 19 days after launch, and they pivoted to knock $20 off the price tag to make it competitive with Overwatch. Kinda funny to use those two words together, competitive and Overwatch. By August of that year, the peak player count on the Steam version of the game was only around 1,800 people, and things were only getting worse. That's when the rumors began floating around that the game was going free to play. While that could hurt the profits of the game in the short term, long term it could end up making it a success. It's the exact same thing that happened to Team Fortress 2. Going free to play meant that its longevity was increased by 100-fold, as now instead of dedicating $40, you were only dedicating 40 gigabytes. They may not make back the initial investment, but down the road, people could end up spending more on in-game purchases than they would have for the game at launch. Kotaku would be the first to break the story of Battleborn going free to play, and if that went through, this could have at least been what got people to try Battleborn. But Randy Pitchford heard these rumors and took the time to poke his head out of the groundhog hole he was in to say, I was just told about a reckless story about Battleborn going F2P. That is false. There are no plans to convert Battleborn free to play. A single minute then passes before he tweets out, we have some unannounced plans to do a trial version of the game that would be free, and from which the retail version could be purchased along with DLC. So Battleborn wasn't going free to play as much free to try, which isn't as bad as keeping it exclusive to a purchase, but still confused things even further. You can't enter private matches, you can't play story missions, and you only had a limited amount of characters to play that get swapped out every couple of days. Oh, like a MOBA? No, like a Battleborn. What was Randy himself doing to fix the problem? Porn, mostly. Randy tweeted out the link to a very NSFW subreddit he found. No, it wasn't weird or anything. He just found it by accident when he was looking up Battleborn porn. This was a subreddit containing, let's say, lascivious imagery of the Battleborn cast, or at least it would have. It would have, if the creator had put any moderation in place. Instead, the kingdom was toppled in like 20 minutes. Imagine being the art director at Gearbox who had to work with a ton of talented people to make a super diverse and distinct cast of characters, and then your boss came in and said, hey, I made porn of them. This right here? This is the point of no return. There is no coming back from sinking as low as this. No one could take the game seriously anymore. And if you remember anything about Battleborn, it's either this, or this. A year after the free trial was introduced, the game would get its final content update, with it being announced later that Battleborn was on its farewell tour, culminating in 2021. By 2020, though, the game's peak player count was down to only about 20 people. Do you think the last 20 people playing Battleborn ever meet up for barbecues? Battleborn now simply doesn't exist. There are no more private servers, no active communities. Gearbox simply flipped a big switch in their office and shut Battleborn down completely. All those gameplay mechanics, environments, apparently unfuckable characters just lost forever. No game deserves that, but it's a pattern that isn't just becoming more frequent, it's becoming the norm. How did Randy Pitchford take the game's failures? LOL. Battleborn came before Overwatch, but who cares? Play what you like. That's crazy. I can argue that Overwatch stole from Battleborn as Battleborn came first. The reality is coincidence. I think. Battleborn versus Overwatch. Teach the controversy. Dude, nobody says lame shit like this anymore. Randy's a different breed, man. Now, a swing and a miss like Battleborn, it's understandable. Nobody bats 1,000, so a miss in between some extremely successful games isn't gonna kill the company or anything. But what about if all the games you've ever made are Battleborns? What if you started factory producing bankruptcy? Well, that's the story of Boss Key, a game studio made up of two of the most important men in FPS history, Ariane Brucey and, more importantly, Cliff Bleszinski. Or, as Wikipedia insists people have called him, Dude Huge. While Ariane certainly has his own extensive and successful history in gaming, Dude Huge just gives us so much more to talk about in regards to why Boss Key ended up the way it did. Dude Huge got his start at Epic Games in 1992 at age 16 after submitting a game called Dare to Dream directly to Tim Sweeney, the guy who started Epic and created the Unreal Engine. After his doctor recommended he had more Jazz Jackrabbit in his diet, he'd go on to make the massively popular Unreal Tournament games, one of the most popular series of arena shooters ever made. That popularity thrust the lead designer, Dude Huge, into the industry limelight. He'd have heaps and heaps of praise thrown onto him, and even make the cover of PC Gaming as one of the new gods of gaming. Man, cool people never say crap like they're the god of gaming. Duty H, however, soaked up that praise like a sponge and developed a reputation amongst his peers and himself. When you start researching Dude Huge, you're eventually going to find articles and interviews calling him the bad boy of the gaming industry. He's a rebel and someone not afraid to speak his mind. Okay, Bad Boy is a title that gets more and more embarrassing the older and older you get. If you're 13 and called a bad boy, you probably threw a water balloon at your principal's car. If you're 31 and called a bad boy, you have very nice parents. Regardless, Dude did gain a reputation for speaking his mind on issues such as game pricing, DLC practices, and the growing divide between old school and new school shooters. He himself would bridge that gap with the Gears of War series, one of the crown jewels of the Xbox 360 generation. They managed to live up to the expectations set by having a gun that's also a chainsaw. If this was stuck in a crappy game, I would have never forgiven them. It's lost somewhat in an era where people use gray and brown shooters as a shorthand for bad, but Gears of War was a genre-defining experience. It used Mad World and had novels. That means it had a good story. The good times, though, were never meant to last, as in 2012, a major shift had occurred at Epic Games. After seeing that games as a service were becoming more and more feasible thanks to games like League of Legends, Epic Games sold 40% of their stock options for $330 million to the company who had found out how to make the model so successful, Tencent. This shift in the industry towards what we now know as games as a service left not just Dude, but many developers at Epic feeling dreary and jaded about making games. It was a combination of gamers feeling jaded, as well as working with some very talented people who were also very jaded. I could pitch the most amazing idea to anybody back when I was at Epic towards the end, and they'd be like, I don't buy it. I don't mean to slag anyone, but people get jaded in this industry. This ultimately led to Dude's decision to quit and retire from the game-making scene entirely. Just a year later, though, and the bug had bitten him again. Cliff was back in the saddle with co-conspirator Ariane Brucey to form Boss Key Studios, and it wasn't long before the two would announce their next game, an FPS that would harken back to the good old days of arena shooters. While the idea of going back to the past to try to revive arena shooters wasn't a bad one, it had to be recognized that the last majorly successful arena shooter was Unreal Tournament 3 in 2007, and Dude himself hasn't worked on one since 2004. The industry largely moved away from frenetic arena shooters and more into the team-based tactical shooters like Call of Duty. Although, Dude was one of the people that popularized this genre in the first place, so who's to say he can't do it again? The free market. The game would be officially announced in July of next year as Blue Streak, a sci-fi arena shooter that would launch as free-to-play. Despite his reservations on the idea, Dude Huge was still sure there was a way to balance the game, so people who had money to burn on all the best items in the game wouldn't automatically beat someone who was better, but didn't pay for the new toys. A year later, and the game would not just get a name change to Lawbreakers, but a philosophy change as well. That part about being free to play? Nah, it just became worth $30. Dude Huge later explained that he couldn't find a way to handle the free-to-play model without feeling dirty over it, both from the advantage aspect he mentioned earlier, and just finding the idea of paying a lump sum for a game more fair. That's a perfectly reasonable explanation, but the unreasonable part was just how proud he was of it.
$29.99, none of that $60 multiplayer only bullshit.
$29.99, none of that $60 multiplayer only bullshit.
$29.99, none of that $60 multiplayer only bullshit.
This was one of the earliest moves that put lawbreakers in a bad light. Telling people they got scammed for buying a game at $60 is a quick way to get everybody really defensive about the game they enjoy. Telling them they were a fool to buy it is only going to reinforce their decision. Especially if your game's direct competition launched the same year you do. Yeah, it happened twice! Yep, Overwatch released well before Lawbreakers in 2016, and even though it was only $10 more, you can tell that this was the $60 game he was pointing at. This wasn't the only shot across the bow at Overwatch, though, with Dude referring to it as a PG shooter compared to Lawbreakers, and that Lawbreakers was the Dark Souls of competitive shooters.
You know, you see games like Battleborn coming out, you see Overwatch. I played Overwatch, it's absolutely fantastic, Blizzard can do no wrong. But I think one of the main things that's going to make us stand out is our tone. The fact that we're kind of a mature rated game, or kind of more of an adult one. Our world is less saturated, it's not fully Dayglow like a lot of those characters. And a lot of those games, as great as they look like they're for a younger crowd. Filmed with whimsical characters instead of, you know, ones that I find aspirational that are a little bit more Quentin Tarantino.
The fact that, you know, if Overwatch is Street Fighter, we're going to be Mortal Kombat. You know, Overwatch feels like it's kind of skewed, you know, towards a kind of an anime fan type vibe, right?
We may have very well made the Dark Souls of shooters.
That's a claim.
Okay.
He didn't laugh afterwards. Dude clearly wanted this game to call back not just to an earlier era of arena shooters, but to an earlier era of shooter aesthetics, where something like Overwatch would have been considered too cutie and colorful for the hardcore market. That hardcore market was exactly what the game was shooting for as well, with its anti-gravity mechanic inviting the most hardcore members of the market to try and break it, find new mobility options, and push the game to its limits. The game would largely go silent until its first beta in June of 2017, where people started to notice something's missing. This throwback to the classic arena shooters of yesteryear didn't have team deathmatch. You're remaking the Titanic and then not sinking it! If you're gonna appeal to old school fans of arena shooters and not include team deathmatch, what's even the point? In its place were more objective-focused game modes like Capture the Flag and Turf Wars, which were probably a lot more at home in a team-based shooter like Overwatch. And Lawbreakers was kind of a team-based shooter. Now, obviously, team-based shooter is about as helpful a description as action RPG, but you can clearly see that breaking it down between Overwatch and Lawbreakers, these two share a lot of DNA. In the same way that Battleborn tried to distance itself from being a MOBA, Lawbreakers distanced itself from its hero shooter roots. And just like with Battleborn, it led to people being confused on what this game was. Is it an arena shooter like Dude insists it is, or is it a hero shooter like the gameplay makes it seem? Another thing it shared with Battleborn were player numbers, as its average player count hovered around 3,800, and gave people major flashbacks to the still decaying game. Things only got worse at the next beta in July, when the peak player count now maxed out around 5,000. And by the end of the beta, the player count dipped to triple digits. And with only a week or so before the game dropped, there was no time to fix any of the issues.
Well, a lot of developers and publishers, they do these kind of bullshit marketing betas where they're like, oh, it's our beta and the game's out next week. I'm like, that's not really the case. You're not going to be able to fix anything.
The game's eventual release would make for a great study in the law of diminishing returns, because the third time people got to play Lawbreakers, the peak player count only reached 1,000. This is... well, to put it in perspective, the game wasn't even able to break the top 100 most played games on Steam in its release window. Battleborn made the list, and Lawbreakers didn't. But Steam wasn't the only place the game was gonna be released, as the game would not just get a home console release on the PlayStation 4, but on dude's old stomping grounds of the what I meant to say was just the PlayStation 4. The baffling move was made to only release the game on PlayStation 4 and not the Xbox One, where Gears of War had been released and the most people excited for a new Duty Huge game would have been. In Duty Huge's defense, he did make sure to come off as an asshole while handling the criticism.
You guys announced that the game is coming to PS4,
Yep.
PC, but no Xbox, right?
Yeah, and those Xbox fanboys are pretty salty.
Yeah, I mean, well, you know, they supported you for a long time.
And how was that PS4 version faring? Even worse, as the game had a persistent stuttering issue, which meant that you could be using your router as a stand for your console, it wasn't gonna run any smoother. The game couldn't catch a break no matter what, and in 2018, the game would already enter its farewell stage, going free to play in April and announcing its shutdown in September. The game barely lasted a year, and if you weren't staying hydrated, you'd have sworn it was a mirage. A beating like that would usually take someone a while to recover from, but oddly, Duty Huge and the Boss Key kid seemed to bounce back a little too quickly. See, in 2018, a new game was made by Boss Key called Radical Heights. If you look at Fortnite as the Coca-Cola of Battle Royale games and PlayerUnknown's Battleground as Pepsi, Radical Heights was Pond Scum. It's weird to see a game with so much of its own style be so generic at the same time, because this slapdash, hackney-looking game was just the dredges of Fortnite thrown together in a few months. And it was! The director of the game, Zach Lowry, said that the game was the result of a 5-month passion project of the Boss Key team, somehow still having passion after Lawbreakers. But if you look into the timelines, you see that that means that the game started development in December of 2017. That coincides with an interview from Duty Huge, where he said that Boss Key was in it for the long haul with Lawbreakers. The gaming press is just looking for clicks, man. They're just looking for ad revenue. We're gonna keep doing what we're doing, and they're welcome to print whatever they want, but as far as I'm concerned, they can fuck off. We're gonna keep making our games for our fans. Everyone who plays it loves it. You look at the Steam reviews, and we're damn near 90% positive. The thing is, we don't have enough players yet. We have a small, fledgling community that we're continuing to staunchly communicate with on a regular basis. It's fine if you want to leave it in the past and just forget, but don't act like this game's here to stay if you're already coffin shopping. Did they learn anything from the last time they tried this? No, they were too busy messing up. The game did the same thing Lawbreakers did by releasing in the middle of a gold rush of higher quality games. First, it was in the team shooter boom following Overwatch, and then it was in the even tighter crowd of battle royales in a post-Fortnite landscape. It was gonna be a hard sell for anything outside of the big two, and Radical Heights, a buggy, glitchy, ugly mess of an early access embarrassment, wasn't gonna light up the charts if it had a sparkler in both hands. When you enter a market like this, you're not just trying to convince a player to play your game, you're also convincing them to drop the other game they're already playing. And it's not beating Fortnite. Not by a long shot. That's not it, though, since Radical Heights had a Founders Edition that would give you $12,000 of in-game currency for paying for the game instead of playing for free. So when push came to shove, it was okay to put in pay-to-win elements, only when your company was already on death's door. The 1-2 punch of Lawbreakers into Radical Heights sent Boss Key down to the mat, and there was no bell to save him. The company was completely ruined and would end up closing before Radical Heights ever got out of early access. What has Dude Huge been up to since Boss Key's closure? Well, aside from drunkenly and in no way bitterly texting at Microsoft about how they're working on a new version of Scalebound rather than picking up his own Dragon game, he's said that Lawbreakers failed because it was too woke. So, it's nice to see that you could work in the gaming industry for well over 20 years and still have no idea what happened. Besides that, he's retired from game making, again, not before royally messing up the closure of Boss Key by announcing it on Twitter, giving some employees 2 days notice, and others finding out when he tweeted it. On top of that, he also lied about the amount of severance that his employees were given, claiming 3 months when some employees were only given 3 weeks. When pressed on the fact that he was, lying, he said, "Maybe I used hyperbole. But I like to think I did the right thing." A great way to think you did the right thing was to, do the right thing. Nowadays, Duty Huge is enjoying his second retirement, threatening to do something with lawbreakers before retiring to his study to be made fun of on Twitter. As funny as it may seem that Dude Huge lost his studio after all the things he said, there's still another factor, the 60 or so other people who worked at Boss Key. With all the developer closings going around, I'm not going to start celebrating that a company went out of business because one guy that said some dumb stuff doesn't get as much money as he used to. No, it sucks that a bunch of people lost their jobs, and it all comes down to poor management. If Boss Key had tried anything else, making smaller games, waiting out the massive flood of Overwatch, and then it might have gone better, and there could have been room in the market for lawbreakers and not Radical Heights. As it is, though, there's no way these games were ever going to get to shine when overshadowed by their betters. Speaking of one of them, alright, so this was supposed to be where Overwatch lived. I know you can still play Overwatch 1, it's called Overwatch 2, but there are some actual differences between the two, as hard as that is to see. So the original Overwatch is gone, but two things are keeping me from going into it. One is how the story about what's going wrong with this game is changing daily. It used to be simple, Blizzard shoving a monetization model into a game and claiming it's a sequel. Classic fraud behavior. Then they launched the game with pretty much none of the features that they had promised. They started missing dates to add new characters, resulting in battle passes having no prizes at the end, features that were promised at launch eventually getting added in, only to be different than what was promised and cost additional money. The Overwatch Competitive League ate up all their attention and led to the game getting balance patches only for competitive and leaving characters like, the league mascot unable to play the game. That ended up getting shut down after posting embarrassingly low viewership numbers and losing their commissioner. They had a feeder system for the Overwatch League. Isn't that just playing Overwatch? I had to give them my phone number?
Hello, Jaffray. It's me, Winston, from Overwatch. I noticed you haven't been doing your Battle Pass. What's wrong? Don't you want the exclusive skins and characters who used to be base roster but are now locked on the Battle Pass? Unless you pay $40, which is the same price of the original game to unlock them all, on top of the $10 you're paying just to access the Battle Pass, which means that in 1 month, this free game costs more than the original did? What are you, a fucking loser?
Imagine waiting 8 months for a Torbjorn skin. The only good thing they've added to this game is the world's coolest racist, but other than that, not much positive to report. The second reason, though, why don't I want to discuss Overwatch? There's a game I find infinitely more interesting that is technically dead. Right now, any coroner worth his formaldehyde would declare this guy dead as disco, but he's probably coming back. Multiverses! You might think this is cheating. I think they cheated people out of money, so it evens out. Multiverses is the heaviest hitter in the newly vacant platform fighter genre, with Smash Ultimate officially ending out its lifespan and leaving the seat open. Everyone started a full-on bum rush to try to take the throne, and in that bum rush, we've seen countless games fall over themselves in an attempt to make it there first. Rivals of Aether had the best chance of capturing the competitive scene that Smash had left behind, but even then they hacked off most of their name to make the most embarrassingly bad fighting game title of the year. Of the week. Nicktoons All-Star Brawl is a valiant effort made by people who clearly love both the genre and properties they're working on, but they're also clearly on a budget, and that keeps them from making the games as good as they could be. Framemakers, Spiritfall, and Combo Devils all have a shot of going in for the spot that Rivals has, but compared to Multiverses, they're fighting bazookas with water pistols. So what is Multiverses, and why did it seem set to win the race for Smash's spot before vanishing into thin air? Well, this was a game developed by Player First Games and published by Warner Bros., and would be to them what Smash was to Nintendo and eventually video games as a whole. After years of acquisitions and building up their own library, Warner Bros. Had thousands of characters in their possession, so short of Disney, it made the most sense for them to enter a race like this. Hearing the idea of Disney getting involved in a fighting game, though, makes me break out into a full-blown sweat. So it would be a game just like any other platform fighter, right? Flashy sumo matches between the Edmonton Oilers and the Property Brothers, right? Well, the game sought to set itself apart from the pack by fundamentally changing the whole structure, ditching one-on-one fights in favor of 2v2. With that, it allowed them to build the game around a few central classes, like assassins, mages, warriors, and something that would have never worked in a one-on-one fighter, support classes. Bugs Bunny. Mage. It's actually a really good idea. If you're entering a crowded market like this, making yourself as distinct as possible is a smart move, and makes you not just another platform fighter. The other thing making it so distinct is that roster. Of course it was gonna be stacked to the gills. At the minimum, you have all of Hanna-Barbera and DC to work with, and that's before you start including any standalone movies, cartoons, or series. Batman, Superman, Bugs Bunny, Steven Universe, Garnet, Arya Stark, the Iron Giant, whatever the hell that thing is, Shaggy? And this was just the base roster. With content updates, we'd get LeBron James, Marvin the Martian, Stripe, Black Adam, because we all just love Black Adam so much. These aren't just skin-deep additions either. Each player had a lovingly crafted moveset that paid homage to their entire history. LeBron James basing his entire moveset around keeping a hold of the basketball, Marvin the Martian planting flags to give himself and his partner buffs while they're in their range, Velma making the screen go a little blurry when she drops her glasses. It makes Shaggy all the worse, really. Yeah, we're busting out references to individual Tom and Jerry shorts, but Shaggy gets based around a meme from 2017. The game looked really promising, and since it was free to play, there was nothing really at stake. Download it, see if it was for you, and then go from there. And people did that. Multiverses currently holds the record for the most concurrent players for a fighting game in Steam's history. 140,000 people playing at the same time. For a fighting game, those numbers are insane. People were really enjoying a new take on the genre. Characters were distinctive and fresh compared to other platform fighters where it was pretty easy to say one character was analogous for the other. It was fast and fun while still making the 2v2 concept work. From the start, though, there were still signs of trouble brewing. Mostly down to how nobody knew how long this was gonna last. Now, I mean that twofold, but the first reason that I say that is because Multiverses was technically never released. It was always just in open beta. The game wasn't officially out yet. Instead, it was just a way that people could get to know the game before its big official release somewhere down the line. What was odd was how open betas usually have a pretty hard cap on when they're gonna be done, running for around a week or two before closing up shop and getting back to work. Multiverses was very vague with how this schedule was gonna work, and never outright saying when the game was gonna go away for retooling, and that kinda left it as a sword dangling over its head. As more and more time passed with less and less content updates, people would ask, is the game out now? Is this it? And there really wasn't an answer. It wasn't early access, that was for sure, but it wasn't really treated like an open beta anymore. That's because of the pricing. Now, a free game having microtransactions is to be expected. Warner Brothers has to make money somehow. They need to keep funding bankruptcies. But this is a beta. At least I think it is. It was more than just a little suspect that we were paying for cosmetics and battle passes in a game that technically wasn't even finished yet. But the way that the content was being released for it, you'd swear it was. Seasons. That's how the game chose to categorize its content output, and that immediately made things weirder. Wait, so the beta has seasons? The game kept getting more and more content like it was a full release now in its live service phase, and slowly the tag of this being an open beta started to drop off. This only led to more people asking if this is all there was, because if so, they were starting to get a bit antsy. The game had online play, sure, but if you look at the platform fighter community, specifically the Smash community, the percentage of people who play competitive online matches is dwarfed by the casual audience who play for the offline options, playing with friends and the arcade mode. For that, Multiverses was really low on options. Arcade mode wasn't even a standard feature when the beta opened and wouldn't be added for months. When it was, Well, it sure was a series of fights with varying gimmicks against the rest of the cast, resulting in a final encounter with a boss. Arcade endings, character-specific paths, rival fights, even a unique final boss were all missing. And worse yet, you didn't even get something like a new costume or a sticker for beating it. The lack of single-player options almost drove away as many players as the other reason I said this game was on borrowed time. Alright, let's be honest with ourselves for 2 minutes. Are the 144,000 people that downloaded this game hardcore Smash enthusiasts who were in it for the long haul, who wanted to get their platform fighter fix? No, these were people like me who see Bugs Bunny and start clapping. Multiverse's biggest strength was also its biggest weakness. It was a spectacle. The average person sees this trailer and they're not thinking about team compositions, if there'll be wave dashing, the monetization model, or content rollout. They're thinking, holy crap, Iron Giant and Superman, sign me up! Holy moly, it's Ultra Instinct Shaggy, I gotta try this out! Game of Thrones. Is that Gizmo in a car?! This was gonna attract people no matter what. It's a headline grabber, it's gonna lure in the casual fan and make a hardcore one out of every, let's say, 1,000 of them. So that original projected number is nowhere near the amount of people that would live to see a second Battle Pass. Same thing happened with Pal World, the only crossover bigger than Multiverses. Luxray meets the Second Amendment. Gets everybody's attention, breaks all sorts of records on Steam, less than a month later, 90% of them are gone. Survival games are like a drug dealer, you find a nice one and you just stick with them. To that game's credit though, 10% of 2 million is a heck of a lot bigger than 1% of 100,000. Just as fast as Multiverses rose, it started to fall again. Update after update came and went with less and less people to see it each time. By the time of Jeff Keighley's 2022 Trailer Park, where the game stole the Best Fighting Game award from KOF 15, the game had dropped down to a meager 1,000 players. Goes to show you that graphics don't sell games, Galactica Phantoms do. Now again, that 144,000 should not be treated as the game's actual peak. It's a fluke, plain and simple. Compare it to another fighting game from around the same time, say, oh, I don't know, KOF 15. The numbers across both are pretty consistent. But a fluke it may be, the charts are always going to say this game lost 99% of its user base in a little over a year, and that's ultimately what's going to drive certain decisions to be made. The ultimate decision was made in March of 2023 to finally close the beta, after being open for nearly a year. It would be fine if not for the fact that the game treated itself like a full release for so long. People had invested time and, more importantly, money into the game, spending it on new costumes, effects, stickers, loads of stuff they either shelled out the money for or grinded out on the Battle Pass. So now I can't even play with the content I paid for because of an arbitrary decision? Yeah, it's kinda how this whole series works. Now, laying the blame at the feet of players' first games would be stupid. There's no way they have anywhere near the sway in this deal to decide when the game starts beta, and certainly not when it closes. Warner Brothers is greedy and short-sighted enough to see the inflated player numbers and all the news articles and think, oh, we never have to finish publishing this game. It can just make money forever. There is exactly zero doubt in my mind that Warner Brothers is ultimately responsible for the lack of communication regarding the game's open beta status, since, well, the developers probably had no clue when it was gonna end either. And given the company's recent penchant for crib-killing movies like Coyote vs. Acme and Batgirl, despite being completely finished, I don't count out that the same thing might happen to Multiverses one day. As of March, there's still no word about a relaunch, is what I would say if they weren't conspiring against me and released new crap as I'm writing this! I already wrote and recorded the whole goddamn thing, so fuck it. Even when it does come back, man, I think the goodwill's been burned up. Most people aren't even gonna know it went away and say, wait, you left? Meanwhile, the people who plugged away on it for so long only to have their toys taken away from them have probably found somewhere else to get their fix and aren't too eager to come back from something that's burned them so badly. Multiverses didn't deserve this. The developers behind it didn't deserve this. Warner Brothers might deserve it. They managed to take a genre that's criminally underexplored and make something with mass appeal that was easy to pick up and have fun with it. And because of the corporate bungling that's doomed so much of Warner Bros. Output over the past few years, it's likely to die on the vine when it comes back. Alright, I think I've gotten good enough at these that I can start making some lucid guesses. That new Suicide Squad game? Yeah, it's not gonna last long. They already got booed out of the venue the first time they showed it off, so this thing's gonna die one way or the other. Oh, no, I'm actually really glad that one of Kevin Conroy's last performances as Batman is gonna be in this piece of garbage. See, watch this. You don't do that if you're not happy. I'll call it right now, I think Beyond Good and Evil 2 is gonna get delisted before it ever makes it out. That game's been in development longer than Duke Nukem Forever. My Little Pony, A Maritime Bay Adventure, that one's as good as gone. Starlink, that toy game with Star Fox in it. I don't know why, just got a good feeling. Don't ask why, I just think they're gonna start burning copies of Ninja Gaiden 3. Funko Pop game? You stay shiny, buddy. You're in it for the long haul. I just think they're done with Scarlet and Violet.